Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the mornings. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Friday, and that's all you need to know, really. Friday, February 24th, 2023. As you know, and pretty much any time you hear my voice reeling off the date, it would be time for another show, generally speaking. And this day is no exception. It is, of course, Friday, and we are glad that Fridays matter again. Thanks to, Dark Brandon / Joe Biden, however you want to put it. He has made Fridays matter again by taking the president is crazy, look what he just said over the weekend news cycle off the table. That's good news. It's good for your mental health to be able to have a day or two to slow down and not be worried about having your house burned down by mobs of crazy idiots who have, quote unquote, learned from the internet and or Fox News that you are a vampire pedophile and drinking the blood of Christian babies, etc., etc. You know how the thing goes. Anyway, as it turns out, yay, nobody in the White House is telling idiots that that's the case. So that's a nice break, and you get to relax over the weekend. Lots to catch up on, of course. As I mentioned in the morning post today, we're probably I think we're 3 or so scandals behind on discussing what's up with George Santos. I mean, it's all one big scandal, I guess, but we're a couple of them behind. One way or the other, we're going to end the day not 3, I think. I mean, well, I said that with great confidence when I wrote it in the post for the morning, but figuring that we would either catch up or nearly catch up and have only 1 or 2 scandals yet unmentioned, or that there would be a 4th and 5th created during the show anyway if we laid off and didn't discuss George Santos. But I guess I did not. It was late. It was early morning hours, trying to get the high schooler to get to sleep because he was supposed to get up early to go in early and take a makeup quiz. And, that sort of threw the morning off as well. But I figured I didn't think about the possibility of covering 1 or 2 George Santos scandals and moving ahead on the tally and then having him generate more in the morning to simply boost us back up to 3. And that's an obvious possibility, and I guess I didn't figure that one in. But I don't know. He's got to be getting tired. It's Friday. Maybe he doesn't want to generate another scandal. I don't know. All right. Well, lots to catch up on today, and it's time to, freaking do that already. So there's a lot that we can do that with. I guess we should just go right to George Santos. He's right here on screen 1 without much scrolling of our pocket backlog O stories. That's as opposed to the fresh raft O stories that Greg brings you each morning. We only have the backlog. Okay, well, here's the one that's sitting here on top first. It looks like George Santos lied about helping kids sick with a rare disease. That seems like a nice thing to do for a evil weirdo like George Santos. And this, according to Vice News, and they're specifically Anna Merlan at Vice News, who writes, as I said, under the headline, it looks like George Santos lied about helping sick kids, basically. The headline reads slightly differently, but absolutely no one could have predicted this is a subheader, which, of course, is a wink, wink, nudge, nudge to all of you who have been predicting this for I don't know how long. What is the rare disease? It's a odd-looking one. We're going to have to glance at it a little bit and try and decide how we want to pronounce it. Has something to do with skin, I guess, because there's an epiderm in there. Epidermolysis. Ugh. How many S's are in here? Yeah, epidermolysis bullosa. Oh my goodness. All right. Well, maybe that's right. Maybe it's not. All I can tell you is those kids didn't get any help from George Santos. Not with the pronunciation, not with paying for treatment, not with researching a cure, nothing. I guess. Let's go find out. Thankfully, because no one likes to try to figure out how to say epidermolysis bullosa, and it's also large number of syllables. They have a medical abbreviation, EB. You know how medical things do that, or I should say how pharmaceutical commercials either disguise a little bit about what they're talking about or just shorten the name of it and say it's EB for short. Okay, fine, sure. EB, like EB White. That was his real name, was epidermolysis bullosa White. And I would have shortened that too, so you can see what's going on here. It is a rare and serious genetic disorder, so stop making light of it, you people. This is your fault. You're the ones listening. It's not my fault. You made me say it. I don't know. Okay, sorry about that, and I hope nobody in the audience ever has encountered epidermolysis bullosa. It's rare, so, the chances are that you haven't, but I don't know. Maybe you know someone who has. It's a rare and serious genetic disorder affecting the skin. I decided to say the word affecting as though I were a New Zealander. Affecting, I guess, the skin. So rare, in fact, that even, New Zealand somehow gets into the picture. That's how rare it is. So rare that only a small handful of charities work with people living with the disease. I guess that's a metric. Sure. Anyway, people who work in this world, it's safe to say, tend to know one another. The person that they say they do not know, except now by the reputation he's laboriously created over the last few months, is Congressman George Santos. Early versions of Santos's campaign website claimed that he and his family, quote, engaged in helping children with EB. It's an interesting disease to choose. I wonder how you come by it. I mean, if you're making up a resume, there are two ways you could go here. I was going to say for some reason, there are two paths you can go by. But in the long run, is it better to go with something that is recognizable as a disease? Oh, sure, of course, he raises money for, the big ones, right? Muscular dystrophy, multiple sclerosis, cancer, all sorts of things that people are raising money for all the time. And, but then you say, well, how mundane, but also how believable, right? On the other hand, the other path you can go by, and I guess he decided on this one, was let's choose something so rare that it's the sort of thing that even when people think you might be a liar, you might say, well, why would he lie about that? You wouldn't lie about it like that. You wouldn't just pick a disease that no one's ever heard of that might even move people to look up on the internet whether it even is a disease, right? You're not going to be that crazy. You just throw cancer in there and everybody will just, walk right past it. But I don't know. He convinced himself to go the second way and said on his website that he and his family have been engaged in helping children with EB. Organizations representing EB patients, though, told Vice News they have, you'll never believe it, no records of Santos or his parents ever making any charitable donations to them or doing any other form of advocacy either. So you can't even we're walking around saying, I'm raising awareness. Although I guess he is right now. So, all right. Well, stop. Anyhow, Santos made the EB claim on his campaign website as recently as November of 2020. That was an important date in the election. You may recall it was about the time of the election. So, yeah. And there weren't that many days in November before the election. So they're pretty much saying here, even if they couldn't nail it down to election day, that either right before the election or continuing after the election, he continued on his website to say this. This, according to reporting from the Washington Post, which I guess we could click through and see exactly how they word it. I'm not really into unraveling that mystery right now. In full, the claim at the time read, maybe this will do it. He and his family also engaged in helping children with EB, and they remind us what that is. Through various nonprofit organizations across the country supporting children worldwide. They have been proud financiers. That's what he used. Financiers of organizations that help these children in remote parts of the world where they are denied basic hygiene and care for their wounds. So I don't know whether that's, sure, I support EB. You wouldn't know the kids, though. They're Canadian, that kind of thing, like remote parts of the world, like Canada. Or, we're so exotic, or we help people, I don't know, who are, so bad off in these poor third world countries. And who knows? I guess when you're making up your charitable work, it's hard to tell exactly what's motivating you to do it. Anyway, this was news, of course, to Brett Copeland, the executive director of Debra of America. Debra or Debra. I don't know why they say Debra. I mean, it's spelled like Deborah, so I think they were going for that. DEBRA of America. That is the U.S. arm of DEBRA, Debra International, which is a global consortium of organizations working on behalf of people with EB. And I assume that the EB in Debra is what they're building around. Copeland is also a past president of Debra International, lobbies on behalf of EB patients, and is familiar, in his words, with all the global EB charities. So he's a person who'd be in position to know whether Santos or any of the names that he ever used was someone circulating in that world. I was not aware of George Santos making any claim to have volunteered or donated to any EB charity globally. He told Vice News, "In our database and general records, we have nothing showing any volunteerism or any charitable donations in his or his family's names." And, of course, you could always tell the story. Oh, yes, well, when we were donating to EB, we used the name, looks through records, finds large donor who happens to have died recently, and claim that name. The natural next best candidate would be SOSEB Kids. That's not a great name, but there it is, SOSEB Kids. I say it's not a great name just because it's using all those initials and then doing it on a website, right? So you're SOSEBKIDS.org, and you can kind of pick out, but you're like, SOSEB, and SOS doesn't really occur to you right away, but okay. Well, at any rate, why are they such a likely candidate? If you believed his story and you were trying to find some verification, SOSEB Kids cares for and advocates for children with EB in Brazil, where Santos's parents were born, and where Santos is now facing a renewed investigation over charges of alleged check fraud. That was one of our first couple of scandals. A spokesperson for the organization told Vice News, "We searched our records and did not find any donations from Mr. George Santos, Mrs. Fatima de Volder, or Mr. Junior Santos." As the Post first reported, Santos, or whoever made his website, at some point removed the highly specific EB claim entirely. It was replaced with language about supporting, quote, other organizations that help at-risk children and American veterans. All of this fits in with what you could call, with a degree of understatement, a broader pattern. Santos has an established track record of lying about his background, his accomplishments, his education, his religion, his mother's death, and whether his grandparents fled the Holocaust. He is facing a long list of colorful legal issues in both the U.S. and Brazil, but has not been criminally charged or indicted in any jurisdiction in either country. Santos's congressional office did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Santos's personal attorney, Joe Murray, told Vice News, "As you can imagine, there's a number of investigations, or at least reported investigations. It seems like every prosecutor within the area has announced some type of investigation, although none of them have called me, so it would be inappropriate to comment." Sounds like a comment. In addition to being his personal attorney, Murray was one of Santos's first donors and considers him a friend. It's hard to do, I'm sure, at this point. He told Vice News that as a congressman, Santos is, quote, overcompensating with sunlight and transparency and showing that everything he does is above board. He is, I think, going out of his way to make sure everything is 100% ethical. Okay, well, I'm sure he's going out of his way. Don't know whether he's able to demonstrate anything is ethical. Certainly not 100%, but there you go. All right, so that's one of the Santos stories, and I don't know. I don't know if I feel like scrolling around to try to find the other ones. Yeah, I guess so. All right, I didn't have to go too far. Here's number 2 here, and I may have been exaggerating by saying that there were 3, but I might not be. There might be a third one buried in here somewhere, but you would likely, the further back I go, the more likely that you would already have heard this one, and it might be just that we happened to not get to it the day it was hot. But let's see. The second one from the last couple of days, George Santos reported spreading campaign cash to other Republicans, but the money never showed up. So that's, of course, a cardinal sin, is cheating other Republicans. They're not going to like that very much, I don't think. Greg mentioned this one, so we get a half a point for having it mentioned on the air. Let's take a look down. We're looking at Politico's Jessica Piper, who reported this one just 2 days ago. One of George Santos's first acts as a candidate for Congress in 2019, way back when. According to his campaign finance filings, anyway, this was for his first run, his first failed bid, was making a series of four-figure, I don't know how many were in the series, but the number of figures, a number of four-figure donations, 1,000 plus, right, from his campaign to a pair of local Republican groups and President Donald Trump's re-election committee. But according to those groups' own filings, the contributions were never received and may not have been donated. Either that or, of course, I guess you got to consider the possibility, considering that there were Republicans on the receiving end of these donations, it's also possible that they are horrible liars and are covering up something, although what they would have been covering up by not reporting a George Santos contribution in 2019, I have very little idea. But they could be, reporting it incorrectly. Or, the more likely explanation, he was lying about dispersing those funds. But according to the we just did that one. According to the group's own filings, there's no record. The purported donations included $2,800 to Trump's campaign, that isn't reflected in his campaign finance disclosures and would have exceeded contribution limits if it did happen, as Santos's campaign reported it. I guess he heard the wrong maximum number and reported that instead, and then didn't give the money. The now congressman's campaign reported dispensing thousands more to local groups that did not report receiving the money in filings with the New York Board of Elections. And it's not entirely clear what was motivating that either. If the groups didn't get the check, it's not like they get little cards that say, congratulations, George Santos has pledged $2,800 to your organization. Go have a party. The check will be there soon. And then, everybody runs around celebrating the fabulous donation. The check either shows or it doesn't. There's no, calling card. There's no real opportunity for someone like Santos in a bid for Congress, his first bid for Congress, you might advertise which elected officials had endorsed you, but it's very unlikely that you would have spent any time telling people what elected officials you've endorsed or contributed to. And I'm not even certain where he might have trumpeted that. But why then bother to list it in your FEC filings? And the only answer there I could give you by way of guessing, and who knows whether I'm on the same wavelength as this nudnik or not, but the only thing I can think of is a lot of cash has come in or has to be reported as having come in, and you have to account for something having happened to it. And I don't know. So you don't have any yard signs or bumper stickers or buttons or anything to speak of. So you can't just hide it all by saying I spent it on that stuff. So you could say I sent it back out the door to other Republican candidates or organizations when in fact you were pocketing it and, buying clothes with it or paying your rent with it or something like that and reporting it as gone in some other way. I guess that's the only thing I can think of off the bat for why you would be doing this. The early donations were just the beginning. Santos's campaign would go on to become a prolific political donor, giving tens of thousands of dollars to other candidates, groups, and nonprofits. Most of the later money was confirmed as received in those groups' own filings, although there are more reports that did not match up, including $2,000 that Santos's campaign reported giving in 2021 to Arizona Senate candidate Blake Masters, though Santos's disclosure listed a non-existent Florida address for Masters' campaign. A spokesperson for Masters, who lost, of course, to Senator Mark Kelly in Arizona, confirmed his campaign did not receive the donation. That's an interesting notation all by itself there, and a fake Florida address. And now I would be saying, let's look into that address and see what's going on there. Why would that have been the one listed? And who might be behind that? I bet there's some story to be found out there. Since Santos launched his first campaign in 2019, more than 3 years before he was elected to Congress, that's kind of a weird and misleading sentence. I mean, it's not that he was campaigning in 2019 for the 2022 election. He was running in 2020. He just lost. But okay. I mean, factually correct to say that since Santos launched his first campaign in 2019, more than 3 years before he was eventually elected to Congress in his second attempt, his campaign reported more than $9,000 in donations that do not align with what was reported by other groups, according to a Politico analysis of campaign finance records. Though a relatively small sum out of millions in campaign expenses, the mismatching reports do fit into a pattern of other inaccuracies and discrepancies in the New York congressman's finances dating back to the very early days of his first campaign. And that only adds to the mystery, right? $9,000 in discrepancies. It's not nothing, and there's no real good reason for it, but $9,000 isn't the sort of sum you're used to seeing when you're talking about people saying, to hell with it, I'll just launder money. It'll be, I'll just take it. I mean, $9,000 is $9,000, but you'd think he would be laundering more if he felt like he had hit upon a scheme for doing that. So now it's really unclear what he might be up to. Saurav Ghosh, the director for federal campaign finance reform at the Campaign Legal Center, a nonprofit that has filed a Federal Election Commission complaint regarding irregularities in Santos's second congressional campaign, described the 2019 transactions as part of a troubling pattern. The Santos campaign's disbursements to other political committees should be mirrored on those committees' disclosure reports, and the fact that they aren't indicates yet another serious reporting error or perhaps even outright fraud, Ghosh said. Santos's lawyer, Joe Murray, you remember him from the last article, declined to comment on questions about the reported donations. It would be inappropriate to comment on an open investigation, Murray said. It's inappropriate for all of his comments, apparently, because he never comments. Santos has previously brushed off questions about his campaign's finances, saying such matters were dealt with by campaign staff. He is facing several FEC complaints as well as investigations from local and national prosecutors, but he has not been charged with a crime. Santos has acknowledged some mistakes in his campaign finance reporting, telling Fox 5 last week that there had been clerical errors or system errors with respect to certain transactions, and saying he wanted to see discrepancies rectified. He also agreed to forego his committee assignments in the House while investigations are ongoing. The donation to Trump's campaign was among the earliest by Santos's campaign committee, which was formally registered with the FEC in October of 2019. The timing of the donation, dated September 26, 2019, coincided with a Trump fundraiser in New York City. Santos posted a video about the event on social media, but neither the Trump campaign nor the former president's joint fundraising committee or his other political groups ever reported receiving a donation from Santos or his campaign, according to FEC filings. A Trump spokesperson did not respond to inquiries. The amount of the donation reported by the Santos campaign, $2,800. The maximum individual donation at the time also would have exceeded contribution limits, as transactions between campaign committees are capped at $2,000 per election cycle. Aha, I see. So I was going to say, $2,800 sounds like the right amount of money, actually. You're allowed to give, I think, $1,400 per election cycle, so you can claim one was for the primary and one was for the general, even if you're giving after the primary. I don't know why that's the case, but or maybe it's not, and everybody just says, to hell with it. But $2,800 sounds like a familiar figure, and I think he grabbed that, but he had no idea that since he was giving from his campaign committee, that the limit was different. And also odd of him. I mean, it would fit the pattern for him to have given from his campaign committee because it's not cash out of his own personal pocket, and that makes sense for someone like him. But at the same time, he was running a campaign that was in 2020 going to get crushed. And I don't think that he was swimming in campaign cash at the time, unless, maybe he was laundering somebody else's money. But ordinarily, I would have guessed that his 2020 campaign and his 2022 campaign were probably pretty cash starved. And it seems weird that he would be giving the money away, unless, of course, his campaign was just a front for laundering somebody else's money into Republican campaigns. Anyway, so let's see. Where were we? Yeah. Santos's campaign similarly reported sending money to several local New York groups in the early going, beginning with $1,500 donation to the Town of Oyster Bay Republican Club in September of 2019. No such group with that exact name actually exists, but neither of the two Republican groups with Oyster Bay in their names ever reported receiving any money from Santos's campaign, according to the New York Board of Elections Campaign Finance Database. The Santos campaign also reported a $2,000 contribution to the Nassau County Republican Committee's federal account in mid-October, but the group reported receiving no money in its federal account at all in 2019, according to FEC filings. Its state-level account also did not report receiving any money from Santos's campaign around that time, according to the New York Board of Elections data. The three donations to Trump campaign, the Nassau County Republican Committee, and the Oyster Bay Group were reported by Santos's campaign as being part of the same American Express credit card payment paid in January of 2020. Weird.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Got a little bit of noise going on in the background. Ignore it. It's George Santos stealing money. That's it. That's the sound of some water boiling and the electric kettle in the background. All right. We were saying, there was something weird about the donations. They all came at one time. Nobody got any money. Trump's campaign, Nassau County Republican Committee, or the Oyster Bay Group, but apparently all part of the same American Express credit card payment paid in January of 2020, according to Brendan Fisher, a campaign finance lawyer and deputy executive director at the nonprofit Documented. That's the name of the nonprofit. For later donations, Santos's campaign did not report using a credit card. I mean, that's an unusual detail, but okay. It's impossible to believe that all three of these political committees independently lost track of political donations from Santos's campaign during this period, Fisher said. And I guess That seemed to, I thought he was going somewhere else with that quote. It's very unlikely that 3 campaigns would lose the donations, but you could believe it if he sent out like thousands of checks, let's say. You could say 3 out of 1,000 checks could have been lost by campaigns. It could probably all be lost by campaigns, but there were no checks. This was all done in one fell swoop with an American Express card. So I guess it's a little more impossible to believe if there's no paper check to be processed and it's all electronic, and that 3 different campaigns would have whatever computer glitch you would need to have to not be able to register an American Express payment on the same day is, a little difficult to believe. I thought he was going in that direction. Santos's campaign also reported making a $750 donation to the Queens County GOP in December of 2019, but the group did not report receiving it, according to the New York Board of Elections data. In fact, no local or county level committees in the New York campaign finance system reported receiving money from Santos's campaign at all during the fall of 2019 or the spring of 2020, according to a Politico review of campaign finance records. The Nassau County Republican Committee reported receiving $1,000 from his campaign in August of 2020. That donation aligns with one reported by Santos's campaign, so that one actually worked out. Distinct, though, from the $2,000 that he previously reported giving the group. A few local groups also reported receiving donations from Santos as an individual, interesting, totaling several $100s. Santos's campaign would emerge as a more significant political donor during the next election cycle, ahead of his 2022 victory. State and local groups in New York reported receiving more than $18,000 from his campaign in 2021 and 2022. His campaign also reported giving $5,500 to other federal campaigns during the 2022 election cycle, with most of these transactions aligning with what was reported by other groups, although far more funds flowed through his leadership PAC, which there's no point in his having had, but he did have it because, A, those are the PACs that allow spending on candidate lifestyle support, and B, that much easier, therefore, to launder money through. But whatever. Most of the later contributions reported by Santos's campaign did match what was reported by other groups, with the reported donation to Masters as a notable exception, and a weird one at that. Okay, so, all right, he's doing other weird things or not doing other, normal things, which is weird in its own way, and he seems like a really, really complex, weird kind of goofball criminal. So, okay. You got to throw in the criminal at the end here. It's no joke what he's doing. All right, let's see. Other things to bring you up to speed on. Let's see. Yesterday, what did we read yesterday? Oh, yeah, right. We read the story of the Arizona Attorney General. Was it Brnovich? Is that right? Whose own department, in investigating the so-called election fraud claims in Arizona, discovered what the rest of us discovered, and everybody who's investigated these claims has discovered, that there was no basis to them and no evidence whatsoever of any election fraud. And I think they reached an even broader general conclusion. The usual boilerplate language is that people say, well, there's been no evidence of significant election or voter fraud, nothing that would have changed the outcome. But they basically came straight out and said, we didn't find any evidence of anything at all, small or large, changing the outcome or not changing the outcome. We pretty much completely debunked the whole thing. So what do you do if you are an election denier, attorney general, Republican attorney general in Arizona, who finds through his investigation that there was no steal in the, as referred to in the Stop the Steal movement? What do you do with your report? And the answer is, well, there are a couple of things you could do. One, you could tell the truth. So that's out. Two, you could lie and say, we found lots of evidence. Or three, you could at the very least bury the report that says there was no evidence, and that's the direction he went. In the meantime, of course, off and on, appearing on television to say that terrible things did happen, and there's lots of proof of it. You're not going to see any from us, but whatever. So I thought that was interesting. They took the report that said there was no fraud, and they buried the thing, but not, of course, before issuing their own interim report before the final report came out, saying basically the opposite. Oh, yeah, there was lots of fraud, and we can prove it. Oh, okay, there was none, and we can't. Right. All right, that's what I meant. Well, anyway, as usual, every Republican accusation is a confession, and whenever they accuse Democrats, you're covering up the election fraud. Well, no, there was no election fraud, and the cover-up is actually yours. Well, another example of the same principle at work comes from Florida. You'd never guess it if I let you say, all right, what Republican-run state is also engaging in this sort of abuse of power and fraud? The answer will obviously be, I think in your top three would be Florida. And Florida is correct. And this time the forum is the Surgeon General's office. From Attorney General to Surgeon General. Most people probably listening to the show will recall that Florida has a kind of an oddball Surgeon General, of course, appointed by Ron DeSantis, as he's sometimes called when you're discussing him in the COVID context. He went out of his way to find an attorney, or rather a Surgeon General who would be willing to say the dumb things that he needs said politically about COVID and various other maladies and diseases for which there are constituencies among the MAGA kooky Republican faithful. Anyway, so this is the guy. You remember him? Well, I don't. What's his name? Joseph Lapado. So here he is, featured here in this Ars Technica report, which relies on to a great extent on Politico reporting on the same story, but I'm going to use their coverage of it. They had an interesting angle. The headline being, Florida Surgeon General fudged data for dubious COVID analysis, tipster says. The state closed the investigation because they don't want to investigate the guy, and Ron DeSantis controls the state investigation. So they closed that investigation, leaving more questions than answers, says either Beth Mole or Beth Mole or Mole, or however it might be pronounced. It's a good question. I don't know. There's only 4 letters, but 5 ways to go with it. I'm just telling you I don't know. Florida's health department opened and then closed an investigation into the state's polarizing Surgeon General Joseph Lapado after a tipster claiming to have insider knowledge alleged that Lapado, quote, manipulated data and committed, quote, scientific fraud in his final edits of what became a contentious, widely panned analysis on COVID-19 vaccine safety in young men. You'll recall DeSantis desperately needed at that time politically a report that would say, the vaccine's a bad idea and it's got adverse health effects of its own and you should avoid it and you're better off risking COVID than taking the vaccine, says this terrible, terrible, stupid report, which is 100% wrong. YouTube just wanted to, clear that up for you. The people about whom we're talking here and about whom Ars Technica is reporting are vaccine deniers and anti-vaxxers, and they're wrong in all of this, and we are reading an article about how wrong they are. All right, just so you're following along. Algorithm. All right. Now, that's all according to a report by Politico, which reviewed state documents on the investigation, including the original complaint from the tipster. Those documents appear to raise more questions than answers regarding the accusations and the health department's investigation. According to the documents, the Florida Department of Health's Inspector General opened an investigation in November of last year, but closed it at an undisclosed time because the anonymous complainant did not respond to follow-up questions. Whether or not they ever got them, we don't know. We don't know what kind of effort was really made to reach the person, or whether that's a valid reason for closing an investigation or not. I'm curious what the Politico headline is on this story. I'm going to click through. Florida Surgeon General Joe Lapado investigated for allegedly falsifying COVID report. Dry, but okay. So interesting, and also interesting that the Inspector General has to come in and investigate the Surgeon General, which, if they find anything bad, would probably have to be prosecuted by the Attorney General. It's a big battle of generals in this. So next section up here is going to call for our I'd probably call for our censoring horn. Do we even have that in the I just have various. The only thing I have is various usages of it in Greg's comments. But anyway, it's the title of the section is Bat Crap. That's the word we'll allow ourselves to use. Bat crap. It's the S word, of course. Study. that's some kind of reference to this Lapado study. All right. Anyway, the dubious analysis at the center of the controversy was posted online last October by the health department. They actually put it out. Oddly, though, it did not list any authors or bear the health department's letterhead or other identifiers. That is kind of unusual. Lapado used the analysis as the basis for the state's concerning recommendation that males aged 18 to 39 should not receive an mRNA-based COVID-19 vaccine. Again, YouTube, they absolutely should receive that, but their report said that you shouldn't, and we have to tell people that their report is wrong, and you have to let us tell them that without getting in the way, or else the real anti-vaxxers is you. So just wanted to let you know that. If you keep getting in the way and taking down our podcasts reporting factually that anti-vaxxers have been caught lying to people about the efficacy of vaccines, and they never find that out because you keep taking our podcasts down, and then they go and they listen to these idiots at the Department of Health in Florida and don't get the vaccine based on their bad advice, then it's your fault that they did that, and you should really stop. It doesn't cost that much to get a human to check these things from time to time, especially when you file an appeal. And it's a little dumb for your algorithm to flag these podcasts and then for your same algorithm to just auto answer all appeals as denied within 15 seconds of their being filed. It makes people think that you're not really doing anything. Anyway, where were we with this? Oh, yeah. So the dummies who were totally wrong put out this concerning report based on this fake-ass study telling males ages 18 to 39 not to get the vaccine, which is bad advice. That recommendation goes against the recommendations of all other major health organizations, including the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. As ours previously reported, the analysis was roundly criticized by outside epidemiologists and other health experts who described it as utter rubbish, or extremely misleading, comically bad, seriously flawed, and the absolute most bat study, design, and analysis plan I have ever seen. Others noted that the conclusion smells of pea hacking, and I'm telling you, it's a thing, and I think they're talking about, I forget my statistics from way back when, but I guess if you're trying to prove, some causal relationship, is that it? Or I thought it was R rather than P, but I don't know. P hacking, not PEE hacking, although that's a thing too, I guess. But it smells of P hacking, just leaving it at that, and data cherry picking. And, okay, you can look it up, and there's a little link here to P hacking. Do I even want to know? It leads to a Wikipedia article on data dredging. Data dredging, also known as data snooping or P hacking, is the misuse of data analysis to find patterns in data that can be presented as statistically significant, thus dramatically increasing and understating the risk of false positives. This is done by performing many statistical tests on the data and only reporting those that come back with significant results. Okay? There you go. Now, if you want to find out, if you don't know and you're not into statistics, why P? Well, you're welcome to go read the article. But, I'm not indulging this any further. If in this particularly stinging assessment, something happened, I would report it to you, and now I will. Ladapo's former mentor at Harvard University, health economist David Cutler. Well, David Cutler bluntly told the Washington Post last year, if I was a reviewer at a journal, I would recommend rejecting it, meaning this stupid, terrible, awful report, YouTube. Cutler echoed other experts in calling the analysis deeply flawed, and he worried it would wrongly discourage people from getting vaccinated against COVID-19. Anytime you tell people to do something incorrect, you risk causing harm, Cutler said, and the corollary to that is anytime your algorithm prevents someone from telling people that the thing they've been told is incorrect, and they therefore go ahead and follow that incorrect device, you risk causing harm, YouTube. The anonymous complaint to the Florida Health Department's Inspector General suggests that some staff at the Department of Health may have been equally alarmed by the analysis, which could explain why it doesn't bear any of their names. That is an odd thing, right? Not to put any names on the report, and not even to put the report on your own letterhead. Next section, lots of people know. While Ladapo touted that the analysis found a link between mRNA-based COVID-19 vaccines and an increased risk of cardiac-related deaths in young men, quote, the analysis performed in DOH did not find this, the tipster alleged in the complaint to the Inspector General. Rather, Ladapo manipulated the final draft of the analysis. Politico reported that nothing appears to be known of the tipster's identity or position, but the complaint suggests that the person might have inside knowledge of the health department. The tipster implored the Inspector General to speak with employees at the State Department of Health Communicable Disease Division, who helped write earlier drafts of the analysis. The person also cautioned that emails related to the analysis were kept to a minimum and that most communication involved hand-delivered notes, which is something you would do if you knew what you were doing, fudging things, and that an email trail would only reveal it. Interesting. You may find, or you may not find, these documents by email as they get transmitted by hand, the tipster reportedly wrote, but they have been seen by several individuals. The person stated that lots of people know about this. The Florida Department of Health did not immediately respond to Ars's request for comment and information. In an interview with Politico, Ladapo called the allegations factually false. I trust the team, he added. They used our Florida data. They performed the analysis, and we're an accredited public health organization. But maybe you shouldn't be, because you pretty much stole the accreditation that was awarded previously to actual doctors who actually knew what they were doing, and you usurped them at the direction of Ron DeSantis, and probably shouldn't be accredited, but it's going to take a while to get around to decertifying you, and in the meantime, you're going to use those stolen credentials to put the health department's imprimatur on bad data and bad results. Once again, every Republican accusation is a confession, and for those saying that they politicized and weaponized the CDC somehow in order to drum up worry about a hoax virus, as these people tend to call it, as it turns out, the people manipulating the data and using the power of the health departments to give out bad information about it is you. I can't believe this keeps happening. It's so weird. All right, let's see. Other stories that I want to update you with. Let's see. One, progress, or, well, not really progress, but I guess minimal progress, movement in the effort by the special counsel, Jack Smith. Yeah, right. That's his real name. Sure, you wish. To get testimony out of Mike Pence. As you know, Pence was coming up with a novel defense from having to testify and looking to quash the subpoena. The New York Times reporting on it under the headline, Special Counsel Seeks to Force Pence to Testify Before the January 6th Grand Jury. Prosecutors have asked a federal judge to set aside any claims of executive privilege, different argument, that former Vice President Mike Pence might raise to avoid answering questions. Alan Feuer and Maggie Haberman teamed up from this piece from yesterday. But I think also, and this may be part of the reporting that that Mark Sumner relied on in writing his front page piece on it. But because I want to start with that rather than the New York Times article about it. Mark usually has a good eye for what's the usable parts of a New York Times article, and then fills in the details around the edges and saves us the trouble from doing it. Special Counsel Jack Smith, he says, is out to shred Mike Pence's delaying tactics with preemptive motion. So let's see what's going on here. On February 9th, Special Counsel Jack Smith subpoenaed Mike Pence, as you know, to testify before a grand jury in connection with the broad investigation into Trump's false claims about the 2020 election and their connection to the January 6th insurgency. As Kerry L. Lavelle reported at the time, and it's linked here, Pence was not just the primary target of Trump's pressure campaign leading up to the January 6th attack, but was also among the people most informed about Trump's state of mind and intentions in the days following the election. However, 5 days after that subpoena was announced, Laura Carlson reported on how Pence was doing what seems to be standard procedure for any Republican in any situation, refusing to cooperate. Prior court rulings had diminished the ability of those around Trump to hide under the heavily used umbrella of executive privilege, so Pence declared he was taking a new tack. He would challenge the subpoena on the grounds that his former role as president of the Senate made him immune to questioning under the Constitution's speech or debate clause, which has at least the merit of being a novel contention. Wrong, and also wrong-headed, but novel. Now, the special counsel's office at the Justice Department is pushing Pence into testifying before the grand jury and seeking to cut off his attempts to challenge the subpoena. They've placed the whole matter before the federal district court in Washington as a kind of preemptive strike. However, no matter how this move turns out, there's little doubt that Pence will attempt to drag his feet until he can mumble something about being a 2024 candidate, only this time delaying tactics seem a lot less likely to work. We'll see. As the New York Times reports, this motion is being filed even before Pence gets his swing for the fences challenge in front of the courts. The speech and debate clause is in the Constitution specifically to protect the role of Congress from an overreach by the executive branch. However, as a former member of the executive, Pence is now seeking to use his part-time role in the Senate as a means of hiding on the other side of that line. However, or rather, how claiming to be an ersatz senator is supposed to free Pence from testifying is a bit of legal legerdemain that will probably remain unclear until Pence actually drops that challenge in front of a judge. I think we understand it pretty well. But the special counsel's motion ignores whatever argument that Pence intends to marshal on that front, and instead it concentrates on clarifying rulings that executive privilege can't be used to prevent Pence from testifying in an investigation that is specifically about his potential, or rather, about other people's potential crimes committed by the executive. The crime fraud exception is a hole in executive privilege, all privileges really, designed for exactly this kind of situation, or actually for much milder situations, because the authors never actually contemplated something of this severity, but it still serves, or it might, if it ever gets a chance. Well, that's a little bit inaccurate, I think. The crime fraud exception has nothing to do, with this particular type of situation. It's just a generalized prohibition against any kind of privilege applying when the privilege is being used to cover up evidence of participation by the witness in a crime. Now, the executive privilege is a privilege like any other, but various other privileges are also subject to the crime fraud exception. And yes, the framers of the crime fraud exception are not the framers of the Constitution per se, but the framers of this crime fraud exception absolutely did contemplate it. They contemplated its a use to cover the worst possible situations where people who participated in murders would be using certain privileges to prevent them, to protect themselves from having to testify, and piercing through that and saying, no, you have to testify because your use of the privilege is really just a part and parcel of the cover-up of your crime, and presumably the worst crime possible. So, okay, that's a little unusual. This is not a little-known constitutional provision about getting to the president during an impeachment trial or something like that. It's a very generally applicable principle. Anyway, over the last 5 years, Republicans have learned several big lessons from Donald Trump. This is sort of a second section, I would say. It's not separated from the other one, but we shift gears here. And unfortunately, I would say here that both the New York Times bit, as far as I could tell from quick skimming of it, and this piece here, both sort of brush past the interesting claim being made here, the speech and debate clause, and just say, well, it probably won't work. But I don't know that that's really the case. I mean, it is novel and it's never been tested, but both the New York Times and Mark here, I think, rely a little bit too much on the fact that courts have brushed aside executive privilege claims. Yes, and they would be likely to brush aside the executive privilege claim here too. It's just, so what? They're talking about a totally different kind of privilege here. I mean, they'll plead both and they'll sweep aside the executive privilege claim, but that doesn't help us get past the speech and debate clause claim. I mean, they're related and you might be able to use the same theory to eventually sweep the other one aside. I don't know whether anybody has ever claimed that there was a crime fraud exception to the speech and debate clause, but I guess you could do that too. I mean, like I said, crime fraud exception is broadly applicable, and I don't know if they ever got it. Anyway, the point is, though, that I guess this report still conflates the two, and saying that the special counsel is prepared to sweep that aside when he's really only prepared to sweep aside executive privilege claims in this way seems like an overbroad conclusion. Anyway, more about this in a minute. Okay, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Where do we leave off? Oh, yes, right. We were clarifying that the crime fraud exception has been used already to brush past the executive privilege claims in a lot of Trump-related cases, and that while there's every possibility that you could sweep aside even speech and debate clause privilege claims with a crime fraud exception, I suppose it's possible that you could construct such an argument. One, we haven't seen the argument yet, and two, I am not aware of it having been used in the past, though, there's a long history of both that privilege, that one is in the Constitution, and the crime fraud exception isn't new, so it's entirely possible that in some corruption case at some point where a member of Congress might have, I don't know, if I'm thinking of, if you have $80,000 hidden in your freezer sort of thing as a member of Congress, right, and you try to use the speech and debate clause to prevent the FBI from searching your freezer, I'm not certain it would work, right? Even though it was probably very poorly founded in the first place, because not a lot of speech or debate goes on inside of a freezer, but you never know what the claim might be. Anyway, the point is that that still stands out there, and it's a novel twist, and I'm not so sure that they can blow past it quite as easily. Anyway, and of course, it would be difficult, though, to use a crime fraud exception attack against a person like Mike Pence, who is himself not accused of participating in either of the crimes. So I don't know. I mean, it's a little more difficult to argue, I guess. Although, as they say, he is a unique source of information on Trump's actions and state of mind following the election, and was the target of most of the pressure, and so knows perhaps better than anyone to what lengths Trump said he was willing to go. And then the evidence is out there of how far he was willing to go by not tamping down on people who were chanting "Hang Mike Pence," of course. So it may be that it's a unique bit of information that just isn't available in any other way, and refusing to hand it over is obstruction of justice and furtherance of Trump's crimes, even if Pence never meant to participate in them. Why cover them up is the real question. And maybe that's how you can get past some of this privilege. Anyway, as Mark was saying, and shifting to a slightly different topic here, over the last 5 years, Republicans have learned several big lessons from Donald Trump. They've realized that their supporters love it when they, quote, say this quiet stuff out loud when it comes to racism, misogyny, and attacks on every letter of LGBTQ plus Americans. They've learned that no conspiracy theory is too ridiculous to be accepted by the most rabid subset of their followers. They've learned that you can literally sit on a golden throne, sucking on a silver spoon, and still get away with calling people who fought for everything they ever earned elitists. But the most effective lesson Trump may have taught Republicans is simply this: the justice system is a joke, and no one who is rich and powerful should ever fear it. Of all the skills Trump brought to Washington, the biggest was his experience in 3,500 lawsuits. He understood very well the one ability he has honed more than anyone else, the art of the stall. Whether it was protecting his tax returns, dealing with the documents he carted off to Mar-a-Lago, or any threat of someone being forced to testify, Trump made the same moves. Appeal, then appeal the ruling on the appeal, then appeal some more, and when that fails, find new grounds for appeal. While you're at it, find a politically friendly judge, start a competing set of motions, and make sure the whole thing becomes such a stew of claims and counterclaims that even the prosecutor in charge isn't certain what's going on. If anything gets close to conclusion, start a new series of appeals, because there's always more grounds for appeal. Through these methods, Trump managed to drag efforts to obtain some information out so long that the quest to obtain it was finally retired. Or, as in the case of his taxes, the information only arrived just as Republicans were moving into the House, so they could both ignore the crimes the documents made clear and begin an investigation of those who asked for the documents in the first place. If there are documents that were finally produced or people who finally testified, it wasn't because the art of the stall was exhausted. It was just because Trump thought he'd delayed things enough that they no longer mattered. However, the evidence so far is that if anyone in Washington, D.C. holds the right blade to cut through Trump's method of tying the court into Gordian knots, it's Jack Smith. Well, maybe. Former Pence Chief of Staff Mark Short and Assistant Greg Jacob both tried to squeeze out of testimony using claims of both executive privilege and attorney-client privilege, which is, by the way, also subject to the crime fraud exception, and in fact is the usual venue in which you find crime fraud exception being applied, when an attorney hides evidence of a client's crime or participation in a crime in order to further that crime, but trying to prevent the crime from being discovered by claiming that their conversations are privileged. That's the usual application of the crime fraud exception. More frequent, I guess, certainly than executive privilege. But anyway, after the DOJ filed a still sealed motion to the court, both men, Mark Short and Greg Jacob, the Pence staffers, were compelled to testify. White House attorneys Pat Cipollone and Patrick Philbin also tried to play a pair of privilege cards. They also ended up testifying before the grand jury, although their testimony may have been limited in part. Team Trump is still attempting to pull the same stunt in another case involving attorney Evan Corcoran, or here identified, I guess, by his full name, M. Evan Corcoran. I didn't know he had an M in there, who was involved in Trump's purposeful holding of classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. That one is still to be settled, but whatever Smith has been putting into his sealed motions, it's been pretty potent to date. That sealed motion from Smith is now sitting on the federal judge's desk in advance of any real claim from Pence. Mike Pence may still be counting on delaying his testimony until he can hide behind some too close to the election rule at DOJ, and then hope that some Republican candidate will rid him of his troublesome special counsel. But this time around, that seems a poor bet. Still, Pence has to pretend, at least, to follow the art of the stall. A Republican cooperating with a criminal investigation? It's simply not done. He can't let his law and order supporters down. So, yeah, well, that's a good point, and it's something we've talked about frequently on the show, that that's clearly a Trump strategy, just to keep appealing and even filing motions to either appeals or motions to dismiss when it's obviously the same case over and over again, except, well, you told me last time that there was no applicable executive privilege when Joe, I can't even say Joe Smith because it's Jack Smith. But anyway, when this person, when John Smith was called to testify and we asserted executive privilege and you cut through it and said, no, that doesn't apply. And now Jane Smith is being subpoenaed to testify. We're not going to learn the obvious lesson that, no, this doesn't apply because she's in the same situation. We're just going to file all over again. And it's a quick open and shut case, but we're going to make you open it and shut it and then appeal it once it's shut. And you'll probably dismiss the appeal. But while the appeal is pending, nothing will happen. And you just keep filing over and over and over, whether or not you have any realistic chance of prevailing. This, though, still doesn't really settle the question, because no one knows the answer about whether or not the speech and debate clause defense will avail itself to for Mike Pence. Okay, so let's see. On a similar front, I guess, news that perhaps Joan McCarter would be interested in, and I saw some people diarying about it last night at Daily Kos as well. This from the AP. Dems they're considering a break with tradition. Oh my, that definitely deserves dramatic music. A break with tradition. Why? To get more Biden judges approved, or rather to get Biden more judges is the way it's put in the headline here. Kevin freaking, I don't know, Freking, Kevin freaking something or other. Anyway, this from yesterday's, what? AP. They don't, publish a paper or anything. Well, let's just dive right into it. Even as Democrats celebrated the 100th judicial confirmation of Joe Biden's presidency, they are clamoring for more, and some are flirting with ending a century-long Senate practice to help make it happen. And you don't want to get in the way of century-long Senate practices, even though they're not written down anymore. The rising friction over what in Washington parlance is known as the blue slip is creating tensions on the Senate panel that handles judicial nominations and prompting stern warnings, from Republicans about a dangerous escalation in the partisanship that already dominates the judicial confirmation process. This very much echoing the talk about the nuclear/constitutional option from back in the early 2000s, 2004, 2005, in which Republicans essentially did the thing. And then when Democrats took over control of the Judiciary Committee and they considered doing the thing. And then when Democrats did the thing later on or considered doing the same thing, they said, oh my God, the thing is horrible and terrible and a break from Senate tradition. Just to clarify, that was kind of muddied. But in 2004, 2005, when Republicans controlled the Senate and the Senate Judiciary Committee, and therefore the nominating process, and the president was George W. Bush, and he wanted to put some rather weird extremists on the federal courts. And let's see, Democrats used the filibuster to block, and then Republicans said, well, we have a way to get rid of the filibuster for judicial nominations, or really for anything, and we are going to threaten to use it. And Democrats said, you better not, because, of course, and there was a bit of hypocrisy / shoe on the other foot type thing going on. You better not, if you were to get rid of the filibuster for judicial nominations, why, that would break with Senate tradition. The Republicans threatened this extensively, but they didn't do it because they weren't able to pull it off. And in the end, it was a gang of, well, how many were on this gang? Was it 7 in that gang? I think, I don't know. But just enough Republicans and Democrats came together and said, I oppose in principle, either I oppose using this maneuver to get rid of the filibuster on judicial nominations, or I oppose using this maneuver to get rid of the filibuster at all in principle. And enough of them came together that they wouldn't be able to muster the 50 votes that they would have needed to do it by majority vote, with Republicans in charge. And then a few years later, when the shoe had in fact moved to the other foot and Democrats were in charge in the Senate, and a Democratic president, Barack Obama, was looking to get his nominees onto the federal court, and Republicans used the filibuster to block those nominations, Democrats said, well, I remember when you said it was unethical to use the filibuster to block nominations, but I see that you're having no problem with that now. But I also remember that at the time you said when you were in control, you could use this particular maneuver to get rid of or move around the filibuster with respect to judicial nominations. And you said it was awesome and constitutional to do so. So now we're going to try the same thing, at which point the Republicans said, no, that's horrible and unconstitutional. That time where we said it was awesome and constitutional was when we were in the majority, and that's when it was awesome. Now that you're in the majority, it's horrible and unconstitutional. You see, things like this go on all the time. Anyway, then Democrats went ahead and actually did it, which is remarkable and not usual practice for the Democrats at all. Here in the blue slip situation, we once again find that when Democrats were in charge and were nominating the judges, and Republicans had the option to not return blue slips and quietly block the judges, they did do that. And Democrats complained bitterly, but they abided by this not quite 100-year-old tradition at that point. Then when Republicans took charge and there was a Republican president in the White House and they wanted to get their judges on the federal bench, they said to hell with the 100-year-old or nearly 100-year-old tradition and just said, we don't care about blue slips. Doesn't matter to us that you don't return them. We're going ahead with these nominations anyway. Then this is like 3 times now, Democrats have then taken control back and said, we love blue slips so much and we're so angry about the way Republicans ignored blue slips that we are going to handicap ourselves. We know it, and put the blue slip process back in place and keep it. And this is like the 3rd time around that Democrats have said that they were going to restore the blue slip process and done so, and found themselves at a disadvantage for having done so. And so once again, they're considering getting rid of them. And once again, Republicans saying that's horrible. You got to respect tradition. And once again, for the 3rd time in a row, Democrats should be able to say you didn't respect the tradition when you were in power. And apparently nobody gets this message. I really don't understand this. So instead we have sentences like this: the rising friction. It's like 20 years worth of friction over what in Washington parlance is known as the blue slip, is creating tensions in the Senate panel that handles judicial nominations and prompting stern warnings from Republicans about a dangerous escalation in the partisanship that already dominates the judicial confirmation process and has for 20 years. And the shoe has switched feet several times. And I don't know, somehow they continue. AP still says Republicans are warning about dangerous escalations. Really? Anyway, the clash over Senate procedure could have major ramifications for Biden as he seeks to fill as many court vacancies as possible during the final 2 years of his term. Aghast at the speed with which Republicans approved judges during the Trump era, Democrats have made the confirmation to the courts a top priority, vowing to fill every seat possible. Their focus on the nominations is even greater now that Republicans control the House and can stall much of Biden's broader legislative agenda. If that's not clear, what it means is there's nothing getting done legislatively in Congress because the House is a Republican-controlled mess, and there's very little point in burning Senate floor time on things that won't even get a hearing in the Republican House. So they might as well take care of nominations, which has no role for the House anyway. Now, some history, I guess. Since at least 1917, a lot of things happened in 1917. The filibuster invented in 1917 or thereabouts. So this too. And it's all related, of course. Since at least 1917, the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee has sent a blue-colored form or blue slip to the senators representing the home state of a judicial nominee. A blue slip returned with a positive response signals the senator's approval of moving forward with a nomination hearing. But if the blue slip is not returned or comes back with a negative response, that means the home state senator objects and can doom the nomination. Republicans during Donald Trump's presidency determined the lack of a positive blue slip would not stop them from moving forward with considering appellate court nominees, and they did so 17 times. But you're doing it once. That's horrible. Democrats were livid, pointing out that Republicans blocked several of President Barack Obama's appellate nominees by declining to return a positive blue slip. Now, Democrats are being encouraged to follow suit and do away with the blue slip when it comes to the district judges, not appellate, but district judges, whose courts serve as the starting point for federal civil and criminal cases. In many respects, it's an archaic holdover from a different era, said Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. I think we may be reaching the point of deciding whether it will be continued. Advocates for doing away with the blue slip say fast action is critical if Democrats want to have the kind of success Trump had in year 3 of his presidency, when he secured more than 100 judicial confirmations out of 231. They believe Democrats can't afford to wait months on Republican senators to give their go-ahead for a nominee. Besides, they argue, if Democrats don't do away with the blue slips now, Republicans will abolish it when they return to the majority. Democrats would be chumps to say, oh, well, we're not going to do this because it's a tradition, says Russ Feingold, the former 3-term Democratic senator from Wisconsin, who now serves as president of the American Constitution Society. The group is a liberal counter to the Conservative Federalist Society. The New York Times editorial board also weighed in recently, saying it was far past time for the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee to end the blue slip practice, which, if you're referring to Senate Judiciary Committee chairs, they've already done. There were Republicans, and Democrats reinstated them, but the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee has already ended the blue slip practice. It's Republicans only. Anyway, and speaking of which, the point that Democrats who argue, well, if you don't do away with the blue slips now, Republicans will abolish it when they return to the majority. It isn't conjecture. That's not them just saying I'm reading the minds of, and you're doing a great job at it, by the way, but reading the minds of Republicans. I'm telling you the history of the blue slip. This is what happens twice already when they have gained the majority. They have done away with the blue slip tradition in whole or in part. So, this isn't just me saying Republicans stink and I therefore predict that they'll stink when they do this. I'm telling you, this is how they handle things. Historically, recent history. All right. Well, anyway, the chairman now, Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, has clearly heard some of the concerns voiced by progressives. He has made it a point recently to emphasize how Democrats submitted 130 positive blue slips for district court nominees during the Trump presidency, but so far, Republicans have only done so about a dozen times. That's essentially because Biden has been filling judicial vacancies of predominantly Democratic-appointed judges in blue states. Soon it will get harder. There are about 40 district court vacancies that will require a blue slip from at least one Republican senator. Many of those vacancies don't have a nominee yet, and Durbin is clearly sending a signal to GOP senators to work expeditiously with the White House on submitting prospective nominees. You know, you don't realize how many places there are in the process for Republicans to slow things down. Before there's ever even a request for returning a blue slip, there has to be a nomination made first, and the tradition there is that you confer with the senators from the state. So Republicans senators from any state, generally speaking, are looked to by the White House for names, a list of names from which the president may select a nominee. Or sometimes it's just directly, this is it. The list is one person. Nominate this person. That's my suggestion. But they're waiting for Republicans to make those suggestions. And guess what? They're not making any, because they know that means the process doesn't start. And then when somebody else says, well, to hell with it, if they're not going to nominate anybody, I will, as soon as they nominate that person, they oppose that person and say, I won't return the blue slip on that person. And sometimes it's both. Sometimes you say, I think you should nominate this person, and then the White House does, and then they don't return the blue slip on that person, just to make even more trouble. Anyway, Durbin said he wants to continue with the blue slip tradition, but he's adding a caveat that they aren't used for discriminatory purposes, to block consideration of nominees based on race, gender, or sexual orientation. His comments have alarmed Republican senators, even though they're pretty limited, by the way. I mean, you should be saying, look, I'm not going to allow you to just sit on a nomination for no reason forever. But if you do have a reason, and it's one of these three bad ones, then I'm going to ignore your refusal to return a blue slip. But what if it's just met with silence? I'm not saying I oppose her for racial reasons or sexual orientation reasons. I'm not saying anything at all. Well, I'm not sure what Durbin would do with that exactly. But nonetheless, Republican senators are alarmed. Senator Lindsey Graham said the blue slip courtesy is, quote, very much at stake and at risk here, even though it totally ignores the 3 times that Republicans have already suspended the use of the blue slips, and nobody calls them on it. It's not mentioned at all in this article. He also questioned how Durbin is going to discern the motivations of Republican senators if they object to a nominee. That's a good question. We just asked it. The last thing left in this body that makes the Senate, in my view, and gives a senator a say about consequential decision in their state that will last a lifetime, is the blue slip process, Graham said. So I would just hope we could agree, if possible, that no matter how frustrated we get, we're going to honor this system. Except when we have to honor it. So far, only one Biden nominee for a district court has had their nomination derailed because a senator withheld a blue slip. William Pocan, nominated to the Eastern District of Wisconsin. Republican Senator Ron Johnson withheld his blue slip, saying he had concerns from the Green Bay legal community that they needed a judge locally based and active in their community. That's not a reason to, okay, never mind. Senator John Cornyn of Texas said complaints about the blue slips are orchestrated and contrived. He said that he and Senator Ted Cruz were asked by the White House to submit names for an appellate court vacancy within 3 weeks, which they did. And 8 months later, the administration finally gets around to nominating somebody, Cornyn said. We've got 2 district court vacancies where we have not been contacted at all by White House counsel. So most of the delay is because the administration has been slow in filling these it says filling these nominees, filling these nominations, these vacancies. There we go. He corrects himself. Cornyn likened the efforts to ending the blue slip to Democratic calls for ending the filibuster so that legislation would need only a simple majority to advance rather than 60 votes. They want to fully dismantle the Senate as an institution, he said. Maybe. Proponents of the blue slip say its most important feature is to encourage collaboration and compromise. But I thought that's what the filibuster was supposed to do. All right, well, whatever. We need both. Sure. Durbin said he provided 8 positive blue slips after negotiating on nominees with the Trump White House. I had to give a little. They did too, he said. But Feingold, who served 16 years on the Judiciary panel and 18 years in the Senate, said he believes presidents will continue to consult with senators on judicial openings, even without the blue slip, because they need a lawmaker's votes on other priorities. You need to consult them anyway, because if you try to jam somebody really bad down their throat, they're going to remember it, Feingold said, and that's obviously true, I think. Unless, well, some senators won't be able to remember it. That's possibly true. Blumenthal said he will bring lessons learned from the Obama years to the debate, and he's determined not to let Republicans block district judges through the blue slip process the way they did appellate court judges. The history is undeniable that Republicans succeeded in blocking many of the Obama nominees and therefore held open judgeships, which, of course, you all know they then filled during the Trump administration, and filled with alacrity at that. Blumenthal said, we're not going to let that happen again. All right, I hope not. That's good news. Maybe that's something that Joan will want to discuss come Tuesday. Who knows what will happen between then and now. But I wanted to bring you up to date on it. It's important as a development. And again, it's Friday, clearing out the pocket backlog. That's what we're all about. We got a half an hour left to do it, and we'll return to that with alacrity. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, so many things I need to bring to your attention, and we're just not going to get to them all. But let's jump into one that I have hinted at 2 or 3 times and give you the fuller explanation behind it by reading to you the Washington Post's reporting from way back on February 15th. Wow. Rachel Weiner, Spencer Sue, and Peter Herman on the byline for the piece, which begins, U.S., I guess this is the federal government stating that the Proud Boys leader learned of upcoming arrest from D.C. police officer. We've been talking a little bit about the weird and strange overlap we sometimes find in various police departments around the country. I think it was last mentioned in connection with Portland when we were talking about their situation, about how it strangely seems that there are helpful cops in the ranks almost everywhere, helpful to the Proud Boys, the organization whose members are currently, right now as we speak, still on trial for seditious conspiracy. But That's okay. We'll arrest them all and put them on trial if we can only find cops who aren't actually Proud Boys to do it. But we kept hinting at this, but this is a big story and we haven't really covered it yet. Shane Lamond is under investigation by the FBI over his relationship with Enrique Tarrio, who faces seditious conspiracy charges. What's going on? The leader of a right-wing extremist group learned days in advance that he would be arrested for his actions after a pro-Trump rally through his conversations with the D.C. police lieutenant, according to testimony in federal court Wednesday. Enrique Tarrio was arrested on January 4th, 2021. Seems like it's probably a prominent date or nearby a prominent date of some kind. I just can't put my finger on it. For his part in burning a Black Lives Matter flag stolen from a historic African-American church weeks earlier. The evidence played in court during the trial of Tarrio and 4 other Proud Boy leaders who faced seditious conspiracy charges show the far-right figure appeared fully aware of what was coming thanks to his source in the D.C. Police Department. Tarrio has argued that Shane Lamond, a 22-year veteran of the D.C. Police, is a key witness who could show that there was no Proud Boys conspiracy to overthrow the government because the group shared its plans with a law enforcement officer. But the messages shown in court Wednesday reveal how much the then head of intelligence for the D.C. police was sharing with Tarrio during the weeks leading up to the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. And you get the defense here? The Proud Boys are saying we couldn't have had a secret conspiracy to overthrow the government because we were telling the government about the plans. Well, you weren't telling everybody in the government. You were telling the cops. And as it turns out, you were telling Proud Boys sympathetic cops that you were doing it. And in exchange, the cops told you how to either avoid arrest or when they could no longer avoid it, how to at least make it go down the way you prefer for it to go down, as opposed to being ambushed at home and dragged away in cuffs. Lamond was suspended with pay from the D.C. police a year ago and is under federal investigation for his contacts with Tarrio. He has not been charged with the crime. In a statement Wednesday, Lamond's attorney, Mark E. Schamel, S-C-H-A-M-E-L, said his client did nothing to aid January 6th rioters and, quote, was only communicating with these individuals because the mission required it. We'll see how he thinks, though, in his arguments, I guess. At some point, he added that Lamond was instrumental to Tarrio's arrest, and there is no legitimate law enforcement officer who is familiar with the facts of this case who would opine otherwise. Let's see. On the evening of December 30th, 2020, Lamond and Tarrio had a call lasting nearly 15 minutes, during which Tarrio sent a bulletin to Proud Boys leaders calling for an emergency voice chat. That's a telephone call, but okay. Tarrio made it harder for investigators to follow the conversation by setting his messages from around that time to auto-delete. FBI Special Agent Peter Dubrowski testified, but responses from other Proud Boys indicate that Tarrio had shared with them that he would be arrested soon. On January 4th, 2021, as he flew to D.C. from Miami, Tarrio told other Proud Boys the warrant was just signed. He was pulled over and arrested driving into the city from the airport. According to the court record, by that point, Lamond had been giving Tarrio inside information for at least 6 months. D.C. police declined to comment Wednesday on the court testimony, citing the ongoing investigation. On November 7th, 2020, when news networks declared that Joe Biden had won the 2020 election over Donald Trump, Lamond offered a tip about the right-wing social media site Parler. Alerts are being sent out to law enforcement that Parler accounts belonging to your people are talking about mobilizing and, quote, taking back the country, getting people spun up, Lamond wrote. Later that day, Lamond added, just giving you a heads up. Please keep this between you and me. Lamond said that he and Tarrio needed to talk on an encrypted application. Okay. Oddly laid out this text here, but okay. Prosecutors have used Parler messages to bolster their case that the Proud Boys mobilized for violence on January 6th. particularly one in which Tarrio described co-defendant Dominic Pezzola as one of the, quote, lords of war. They love their stupid terminology, don't they? The following week, Pezzola was at the Capitol, the front of the mob, I guess, at the front of the mob at the Capitol, is what they mean, and was filmed using a police riot shield to break a window into the building. A week after Lamond's warning, as members of the Proud Boys gathered for a pro-Trump rally, Lamond warned that the group's preferred gathering spot, a bar called Harry's, was in danger of getting shut down by the city, according to Dabrowski. That night, Proud Boys were involved in violent clashes across downtown D.C. Lamond at one point warned Tarrio, "We just locked up one of your guys at 14th and K." He then added, "We cut your guy loose. Victim could not be located." The following month, after another Trump rally, 4 members of the Proud Boys were stabbed, while others stole and defaced Black Lives Matter banners hanging outside African-American churches. Tarrio later pleaded guilty to burning the banner and to a charge of attempted possession of a high-capacity ammunition magazine. He was sentenced to 5 months in jail. Lamond told Tarrio that a suspect in the stabbing was under arrest, but also that Tarrio himself was under criminal investigation, according to the court exhibits. "Hey, brother, did you call in an anonymous tip to the FBI claiming responsibility for the banner burning?" Lamond asked on December 18th, 4 days after the incident. "I did more than that. It's on my social media," Tarrio replied. Lamond volunteered to check with the criminal investigators to see if they have you on video. He then cautioned that the FBI and U.S. Secret Service were all spun up about a comment Tarrio made on a show on InfoWars that in the future Proud Boys would disguise themselves as supporters of Joe Biden. "Got an email first thing this morning," Lamond said, with an emoji of a shocked face. Tarrio subsequently reached out to Lamond to ask whether the banner burning was being investigated as a federal hate crime, subject to higher possible penalties. Lamond told him the case was being handled by the police, not the FBI, and that he told investigators that the Proud Boys were not racist, according to the messages read in court. Tarrio then appeared to relay the news to Proud Boys leadership group. "We got the jump on the narrative for the banner burning. This should make it next to impossible for them to use the hate crime enhancement as per my contact at DC Metro," Tarrio wrote in a text message. Shortly after noon on Christmas Day, Lamond shared that he believed an arrest might be imminent because he had been asked to identify Tarrio in a photograph from Parler. "So they may be submitting an arrest warrant to prosecutors," Lamond said in a text to Tarrio. Tarrio's defense attorneys were the first to introduce conversations between Lamond and Tarrio, arguing that the correspondence indicates the Proud Boys were cooperative with police and had nothing to hide. They had sought to put Lamond on the stand, but said in court the lieutenant had invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination because of how awesomely he was serving the public, of course. But Judge Timothy J. Kelly said in court Wednesday that the conversations revealed a closeness and an inappropriateness that undercut Tarrio's defense. Really? Gee whiz. Amazing. Good eye, Judge. That's what's happening. Under questioning, Dabrowski testified that it was not typical for law enforcement to share with sources information on investigations, charges, and arrests. Yes, I think that it is not. It's a novel defense here. Well, you see, I was tipping him off. And because he was accepting my tips, we were in cooperation. So you could say he was cooperating with the police, as opposed to what's really going on here is that some of the police are Proud Boys. You know, that's another way of viewing it, and looks like it might be the correct way. Well, anyway. So yes, under questioning, Dabrowski testified it was not typical for law enforcement to share with sources information on investigations, charges, and arrests. Sabino Jauregui presented the relationship with Lamond as evidence that Tarrio was an asset and ally to the police. In December of 2020, Lamond asked Tarrio for help figuring out where Alex Jones was next planning to speak because D.C. police had heard conflicting locations. Jauregui said Tarrio responded with assistance and also identified to Lamond a woman who engaged in violence on January 6th. Enrique Tarrio cooperated with law enforcement, Jauregui said. He suggested that the FBI was or should have been aware of those interactions in advance of January 6th. Dubrovsky responded that he had no reason to believe Shane Lamond was coordinating with the FBI. Jauregui also accused prosecutors of dragging a highly decorated officer's name through the mud, although he says just through mud. He said conversations not shown in court make clear that Lamond was sharing valuable information on the Proud Boys with his department, some of which was sent on to the U.S. Capitol Police. It's not uncommon for authorities to negotiate a surrender with criminal suspects who have been charged in a warrant, though those instances are typically coordinated among police, prosecutors, and defense attorneys. Tarrio has said he was arrested at gunpoint in a traffic stop as he drove into D.C. Tarrio was set free the next day to await trial, but barred from the district, keeping him out of the nation's capital on January 6th. He has previously hinted that he knew he would be arrested, including in a videotaped meeting with the founder of the extremist group Oath Keepers. It was not clear until Wednesday how Tarrio explicitly had learned about the arrest. Before his suspension, Lamond led the D.C. Police Intelligence Unit. In addition to Tarrio, he corresponded with an anti-racism activist He corresponded with an anti-racism activist pretending to be the leader of a neo-Nazi group. Interesting. Law enforcement agencies typically keep in contact with members of extremist groups, sometimes going undercover to learn about violent or subversive plots, but also openly to plan logistics around demonstrations. At times, such interactions can appear friendly, but police experts have said any contacts with such groups need to be closely supervised and documented, and police should not divulge information about internal policies or operations. At no time did Lieutenant Lamond ever assist or support the hateful and divisive agenda of the various groups that came to D.C. to protest. Schammel said in his statement, Lamond's conduct was appropriate and always focused on the protection of the citizens of Washington, D.C. But apparently, folks don't believe that anymore, and I don't know whether this is the case with him, probably not, or they would have mentioned it, but, they find in a number of police departments around the country that there's weird collaboration with the Proud Boys and some weirdly anti-Semitic tattooing all over the police's arms as well, and, it's just part of a disturbing pattern, since we're using that phrase today. Let's see. A couple of other things that we might be able to fit in here. Trying to decide which ones are worthy of Friday time. That was my first choice. Let me throw in this second one just because I think it's weird, and I'm not certain where it goes, but we might as well get it on the record. And we'll see whether there's time for some esoterica at the end here. The Daily Beast reporting, still behind the paywall here. We'll have to read the pocket version, that Kyrsten Sinema's $300,000 security expert, and I didn't know she had one, but apparently a very expensive one. And it turns out that $300,000 security expert is Tulsi Gabbard's sister, which you're not supposed to hold Tulsi Gabbard's sister responsible for the, many supposed crimes, not in the not the real criminal sense, the metaphorical crimes, the political crimes of Tulsi Gabbard. But it is a little odd. And Tulsi Gabbard getting worse and worse as time goes on. All right. Let's see here. Do they even tell us who the article is written by? Not in the locked version, but we'll rely on Pocket, which sometimes get it wrong. It says Sam Brody is the author of the piece here. But we're reading this through the paywall, so I apologize to not paying for the beautiful, fantastic coverage of the Daily Beast and many dozens of other sources. But hey, things are tight. Anyway, Senator Kyrsten Sinema, an independent, don't forget, spends more of her campaign funds on security than nearly every other member of Congress. Okay. She serves Arizona, so that's not a bad idea. She's underwritten well over $560,000 for her protection since late 2021. But what's more unusual than how much she spends is who she spends it on. And it is a little weird. According to federal campaign finance filings, Sinema's campaign committees have paid a combined $307,000 in security expenses to an Arizona registered entity called TOA Group LLC. And official documents show that TOA Group LLC has just one officer, and that officer's name is Vindervan Gabbard Bellord, best known as the sister of and occasional spokesperson for Tulsi Gabbard. Hey, isn't that unusual? That's pretty weird. And that's another of the great uses of LLCs. People do it in order to obscure things. If you don't want the name Gabbard directly in your FEC reports, because it's controversial, then you say form an LLC and make yourself the only director. It's still you and only you. But that way our FEC reports can say we're paying TOA Group LLC. And it takes an enterprising reporter some time to say, all right, well, who's TOA Group? We'll look up the documents. They have to file them when they form an LLC. And sure enough, there's the name. And, it's all there, but somebody has to take the time to go and do it. And very often people just don't. So what's up here? Gabbard, a former Democratic congresswoman and presidential candidate turned right-wing political figure, has long had a friendly relationship with Sinema. And Gabbard's sister, Bellord, also appears to be quite close to the senator. Since the fall of 2021, Bellord has been employed as the security director in Sinema's state office, a role that has paid her over $50,000, according to Senate records. That's not a lot of money, but okay. Bellord has also apparently been the exclusive security provider to Sinema's campaign, where she can make more money. She appears to have no other clients aside from the Arizona senator. Beyond paying Bellord's salary, Sinema's campaign committee and personal PAC have spent over $240,000 on other security-related expenses, airfare, lodging, meals, and other benefits for security detail, presumably meaning Bellord. In 2022, Sinema's campaign spent over $56,000 for security detail lodging at Marriott hotels alone. Notably, there are also two separate charges totaling over $100,000 for security detail vehicle. Bellord may also have benefited from Sinema campaign expenses that were not listed as specifically security related. In February of 2022, Sinema's personal PAC paid $95 to a fat bike tour company in Park City, Utah. Fat bike. Okay. Days before, Bellord posted a photo to Instagram showing two bikes with fat wheels in snowy mountain surroundings. In response to a comment from Gabbard, Bellord said, "Thanks to our friend," with a winky face emoji. Sinema liked the post, so they pay to go biking together. All right. The connection between Sinema and Bellord is far from coincidental. Sinema and Gabbard first became friends when they both arrived at the U.S. House as freshmen in 2013. During Gabbard's time in Washington, Bellord reportedly lived with her sister and likely got to know Sinema there. According to property records, Bellord's primary residence now is in Texas. As a former U.S. Marshal and the de facto driver and bodyguard for Gabbard's 2020 presidential campaign, Bellord surely has applicable security expertise. That's good. But the previously unreported arrangement between Sinema and Bellord raises several ethics concerns. According to campaign finance law experts, these experts told the Daily Beast that Sinema has an obligation to explain the relationship further. The newly independent Arizona senator has not announced whether she will run for re-election in 2024, but she has already drawn a challenger in Representative Ruben Gallego. Since 2017, the Federal Election Commission has permitted candidates to spend campaign money for their personal security. Saurav Ghosh, a former campaign finance attorney, now at the Nonpartisan Campaign Legal Center. We just heard his name in one of the previous articles. Big day for Saurav Ghosh. He said security is not the craziest thing for a campaign to spend money on, but Ghosh remarked the $300,000 plus sum that Bellord received from Sinema was eye-opening, and that the fact that the senator is her only apparent client is one of the biggest red flags. That Bellord is being paid with campaign funds for security while drawing a taxpayer-funded salary for the same kind of work is exceptionally rare, said Brendan Fisher, who I think was also in the last article. Executive director of the Watchdog Group documented. This is two guys on everybody's Rolodex, I guess. Fisher expressed surprise that Sinema wasn't paying Bellard entirely with campaign funds while saving her limited taxpayer-funded official Senate budget to hire an additional legislative or press staff member. That Sinema and Bellard have a pre-existing personal connection adds to the need for transparency, the expert said, particularly because there are so many charges for expenses that Fisher describes as fringe benefits. It's interesting from the perspective of optics more than legality, Ghosh said. He added that Bellard would not be subject to the FEC's rule that campaign funds cannot enrich a candidate's relatives, but it's also questionable whether someone is providing real legitimate security services or whether this is a sweetheart deal. It's usually somewhere in the middle. Using both campaign and taxpayer funds to pay tens of thousands of dollars to a close friend's sister, as well as a number of fringe benefits, warrants some degree of an explanation, Fisher said. A spokesperson for Sinema did not respond to a request for comment, which included a list of questions about the nature and extent of Bellard's security duties, her compensation structure, and the official policy for covering Bellard's expenses. Sinema, of course, is hardly the only member of Congress to spend lavishly on security in a moment when lawmakers are facing historic rates of violent threats. Senator Raphael Warnock, they need to both sides the thing, so they go ahead and do so. And I mean, there is really nothing wrong with paying for security. It is a little bit weird that it's Tulsi Gabbard's sister, but apparently she actually has some security expertise, and that's a good thing. And they probably did get to know one another. They probably share similar interests, which is why they go biking together, which, it's a little bit of lifestyle support, but there was lifestyle support probably for the senator as well. She's into the triathlons and, running, biking, swimming kind of stuff. So to go biking, she's going biking. She's going to do that. It's her personal choice. She wants to go and spend her time that way, but she's a senator, so she brings security with her. And it just so happens that they're good friends and they share interests. And all right, well, that is a fringe benefit of the job for, Gabbard's sister. Anyway, I think we'll probably stop at this point, but you get the gist. I wanted you to know about that. We'll see whether it becomes an issue of interest any further than that in the days ahead. That gives me at least a couple of minutes to try and bring this bit of reporting to your attention. It's a long piece and one of those Washington Post like graphic presentations at their place where you have to scroll through a million miles of pictures in order to get it. But this is an interesting bit of, not immediately political in nature, but I assume it will be. I think probably its clientele is probably largely political as well. The Washington Post piece here, I guess by way of titling, has this art card here that we have to scroll through. It's one of those weird, what do they say? Multimedia presentations. A reputation management company promises it can secretly remake anyone's online image, but how do they do it? And who do they do it for? Another question. As you scroll, all the various things that they try and get rid of for you are popping up on the screen. Fraud, indicted, criminal, prosecution, misconduct. You get the whole idea. Leaked files, I guess this is the actual headline, reveal reputation management firm's deceptive tactics by Sean Boberg, published on the 17th of February and waiting for your attention since then. And here's where it becomes recognizably, I guess, linked to stories we've read before. And I only have a few minutes, so I'll give you a taste of it. They look at first glance like ordinary news outlets serving up headlines from around the world. You recognize this as the fake news type thing. The hundreds of websites, seemingly unconnected to one another, come in 6 languages and purport to cover far-flung cities such as Paris, London, and Chicago. But beneath the surface, the sites have something in common. They host frothy stories about clients of a little-known reputation management company that promises to remake the online images of its customers. The network of fake news sites is one part of a complex apparatus the Spain-based firm Eliminalia Eliminalia, yes, uses to manipulate online information on behalf of a global roster of clients, an investigation by the Washington Post and other media partners found. The firm employs elaborate deceptive tactics to remove or drown out unflattering news stories and other content, the investigation revealed. Eliminalia has close to 1,500 clients over 6 years, including businesses, minor celebrities, and suspected or convicted criminals. And I would imagine pretty soon, or using the same tactics, politicians as well. The investigation, based on nearly 50,000 internal company records, showed that the firm made millions of dollars by selling these disinformation services, and it illuminates a shadowy corner of the online reputation management industry, a sector that, at its extreme, relies on subterfuge and to alter the digital landscape, experts said. The investigation also reveals how laws meant to protect intellectual property and privacy are being misused to distort online discourse, efforts that tech companies sometimes fail to detect. Though they never fail to detect when I am reading a story about debunking anti-vaxxers. Eliminalia's methods are laid bare in documents that were leaked to Forbidden Stories, a Paris-based journalism nonprofit organization that shared the records with the Post and more than 24 other media partners for a project called Story Killers. The records include emails, client names, partial contracts, and other legal documents. More than 600 fake news websites were linked to Eliminalia by researchers at a Swedish nonprofit called Curium that provides web hosting and digital security services to investigative journalists and human rights organizations. And Curium, by the way, spelled with a Q, Q-U-R-I-U-M, in case you want to look something up about them. We, of course, have come to the end of our show for today, but I told you I'd give you a taste of this thing. You should read it. It really is a fascinating article. And we'll throw this bit in. Between 2015 and 2021, Eliminalia sent thousands of bogus copyright infringement complaints to search engines and web hosting companies, falsely claiming that negative articles about its clients had previously been published elsewhere and then stolen, and so should be removed or hidden, the company records show. That's very clever. I mean, it's illegal, but very clever, or at least fraudulent anyway. The firm sent the legal notices under made-up company names, the examination found. That's quite inventive, really. But in addition to that, their connection to fake news websites, I think, is fairly fascinating. And couple that with the story we read the other day about how they're now using AI bots to rapidly populate these fake news sites so that there are enough stories, a critical mass of stories and reporter bios, et cetera, to make it look, at least at first, maybe even at second and third glance, like legitimate news sites. So a brand new tool for these guys to use. But between that and the fake takedown notices, I think some really clever, if black hat-ish kind of tactics that we ought to have in mind, because I think we'll be seeing them pop up from time to time in the near future.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
And now it's time for you to listen to the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam. What's he got on tap for you today? Tucker Carlson was handed the January 6 tapes, of course, from his puppet, Kevin McCarthy. On the rest of the menu, the California Attorney General opened a civil rights investigation of the Riverside County Sheriff's Office. Let's find out what that's about next.